And today we are covering coping with arthritis. So this is all about mindset, mindfulness. We'll talk a little bit about the power of addressing mental health. It's a really fascinating topic, and we've got a lot of content to kind of get through. But before we get into that, I will start with an acknowledgement of our country. And we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather today. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and recognize their continuing connection to land, waters, and culture. So, just a disclaimer, these webinars contain very general information, but we do our best to make sure everything we share with you is evidence based and it's in line with where the current guidelines are at. So, we're not here to substitute any kind of individual treatment advice. Everyone varies with their treatment from person to person. This is just general information that we want to share with you to add to your self management toolkit. If you do have individual questions that relate to yourself personally, I will always encourage you to speak to your GP or your primary healthcare provider. Um, but in the meantime, I'll do my best to answer what I can if you have any questions. So, we will be talking a lot about the mind body connection, more about cultivating a positive and growth mindset, talk about some of the strategies and look at an example in real time so we can just understand how to practice it more in our day to day and why we want to practice this in our day to day when it comes to managing the ongoing um, pain of living with arthritis. If you haven't already come across the Relax and Restore program, I'll talk to you a little bit more about that and what that looks like. And then, like I said earlier, we will circle back at the end to go through all your questions. So please pop your questions into the chat box. We'll do our best to get through all of them. So let's start with the mind body connection and what that is. And so we know everyone experiences pain differently, but everyone also deals with pain differently. So some people will ask, well, why can this person who has the same condition as myself cope with pain better than this person? Or why aren't they coping as well? And this is because really the mechanisms for pain vary greatly from person to person. Also, that ability to cope, it varies from person to person as well. So, the link between the body, mind, and chronic pain, especially in the context of arthritis, it's very strong and it's very well documented. So, arthritis isn't just a physical condition, it's what we call a biopsychosocial experience. And this biopsychosocial model is what you're seeing in front of you here on the slide right now. It means that there are biological, psychological, and social factors that all play a role in how pain is felt, how it's experienced, and also managed. So, there are several factors that do contribute to this diversity. Factors that relate to things like one person's nervous system. It could relate to how sensitive they are to pain or how well they're able to modulate pain. So, for people who do have more sensitive nervous systems, there is a likelihood that they do tend to have higher pain intensity. And in terms of those pain patterns, they are more likely to have a mix of chronic and intermittent pain cycles as opposed to bouts of just intermittent moderate pain cycles. So sometimes we see these people not only have more intense pain, but for longer durations as well. So when the nervous system is essentially very dysregulated or sensitized, it often we see a detriment to the well-being coincide with that. So, this is why some people who might have more challenges with mood, maybe sleep patterns, poor sleep quality, past pain experiences, stress, anxiety, or even other coexisting chronic conditions, maybe it's heart disease, maybe it's diabetes, they do often experience devastating impacts of pain on their quality of life. So it's not just neurobiology here, but there are psychological and social components to pain, which is why when we talk about ongoing management for arthritis, you'll hear us really dial up the importance of addressing mental health and addressing stress and addressing anxiety. Okay, Where's my next page? So we can explain that a bit more. So I'm sure all of us who live with arthritis can recognize it's a very painful disease. It's also what we know to be very unpredictable. So when we do speak to a lot of people who live with this disease, it's the unpredictability that can really wear people down. So one day you could be managing pain okay. The next day you could be struggling to even get out of bed or walk or do the things that you need to do in your day. And so this can affect more than just your joints here. It really can affect how you function, how you see yourself, how you live your daily life. The brain doesn't exactly change because we want it to. It changes when we combine repetition with emotion and full attention. And I want you to hold on to that thought when we circle back to that later on in the presentation here. When your joints are inflamed or they're damaged, pain doesn't just come from the affected site where the joint is hurting. Pain is very much processed in the brain. So here's the thing, it's the brain that actually decides how much danger you're in, how much pain you should feel, and that interpretation, it's not exactly just about that joint. The brain also takes into account things like, have you been through this before and how bad was it? Are you also feeling anxious, stressed, or depressed? Are you exhausted? Have you been resting your body? Have you been sleeping poorly? Are you afraid to move in case you do more damage? Do you feel like you have any control over your disease, or are you feeling very helpless at this point in time? So it's all these things that your brain is thinking about that can actually dial up that pain or dial it down. So that's why arthritis pain, it can feel so different from one person to another and also from one day to the next. And you might be reflecting right now, you might be thinking, well, that kind of makes sense if, when I was feeling really bad pain last week, I was also really stressed about this situation in my life. Or maybe that's why I was having a really hard time moving last week because I was also going through this. So I also invite you to reflect on those moments. So in 2019, there was actually a large study that looked at data from over 1,400 people. There were people who were living specifically with knee osteoarthritis, and they weren't just asked about physical symptoms. They actually also reported information on things like anxiety, depression, how much they tended to catastrophize, whether they experienced nerve like pain, fatigue, sleep issues, widespread pain, um, even things like brain fog. And what the researchers found was really interesting and it was really important. It was that people who reported higher levels of these traits, for example, more anxiety or more fatigue, also carried more severe and persistent knee pain. And so, what does this tell us? It tells us that pain isn't just about that joint, it's shaped by what's happening in the whole person, the mood, the energy, the sleep, the stress, how you perceive pain, how you think about pain. When these factors are present, they can turn up the volume of pain in the nervous system. So, the researchers actually concluded that to manage pain effectively, we do need to go just beyond just medications or beyond surgery. We need to look at supporting these other areas too. So, in addition to medication, in addition to surgeries, we should be considering things like mental well being, sleep, pain coping strategies, because these underlying factors not only just affect how much pain someone feels, but it could actually help predict who's going to experience more ongoing pain or more severe pain. In 2021, there was another study that actually looked at over 500 people with rheumatoid arthritis. What they found was that many of them were also living with anxiety or depression. About 18% had anxiety, nearly 28% had depression, some had both. And this is where it actually got really interesting, is that the people who were experiencing anxiety and or depression weren't necessarily the ones with the highest levels of disease activity and joint inflammation. Instead, they were the ones who were more likely to report high levels of pain, more physical disability, poorer self rated health, low quality of life, more difficulty managing tasks. And so, in some cases, they were less likely to adhere to their treatment plan and less likely to take their medication as um, it's meant to be taken. So, what this tells us is that psychological well-being plays a really important role here in how people experience rheumatoid arthritis and live with this disease. So, even if the disease activity is under control, the emotional and mental health challenges that come with the disease can have an absolute fundamental role in amplifying pain, making it harder to go from day to day, can make things feel a lot harder. And so the good news is here is that it does open up a lot more opportunities for support. By recognizing and addressing these factors, we can look at things like counseling, stress management, social connection, even just very simple lifestyle changes to help people feel better, to help them cope better and get more out of their treatment as well. So, how does it work at that biological level? Just a quick overview is that we have something called the HPA axis. This stands for the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which is a very major part of the body's stress response system. So you can think of it as being a communication pathway between the brain, adrenal glands that actually control the release of stress hormones. You might have all heard about cortisol before, the major stress hormone in the body. So when the body perceives stress, whether it's emotional stress or physical pain, that HPA axis kicks in. So, although stress is a very natural part of existence and everyone experiences it from time and time again, stress is usually triggered by things like unsettling circumstances, life pressures, being overlooked, being overloaded with responsibilities, conflict, and of course, having a disease like arthritis. That is stressful in life. Pain can be stressful, flare ups are stressful, moving can be stressful, especially if your joints are hurting. So, why I bring it up is because although this system is designed to help the body respond to stress, it's when it's constantly activated in chronic pain or anxiety, it can do things like increase muscle tension, increase inflammation, disrupt sleeping patterns, lower the pain tolerance. It can feed into fatigue, depression, and immune dysregulation. So, when we understand how this stress response works, we start to see that the mind body tools aren't just extras. They're not just things to fluff about. They're actually very powerful ways to support your health from the inside out. So, we want to essentially set the stage here as to why the mind body practices can work. If you are someone with chronic activation of your HPA axis, and this is part of the problem, there is very convincing evidence that mindfulness, breath work, relaxation techniques, even positive mental health habits can do things like calming the nervous system, lowering perceived pain, regulating that cortisol production. If the brain can actually learn to modulate pain, then it should make sense as to why cognitive reframing can help with altering pain perception. And it can just be one of those extra things that can help with that pain stress cycle. When you truly start to believe that you have more control than you think, you are more likely going to be able to engage in positive self management behaviors. And this can help indirectly with things like managing stress, negative emotions, um, and so on. So it's really about just shifting that conversation from having the idea that managing pain only works with medication or this is the only thing that helps with my pain. I want to just remind you that there are these things you can consider to be quite useful in your toolbox. So, one thing we absolutely know is that mental and physical health are not separate, they're very deeply connected. So, that's why approaches that bring the mind and body together are proving to be really helpful for managing pain. And the research is really interesting in this space. Some studies will actually show very clear benefits, while others find smaller or less consistent effects. Especially if you do have other things like anxiety or inflammation, but overall, your evidence is pretty strong that psychological approaches, things like cognitive behavioral therapy, mindfulness, relaxation, group support, education on the disease, can all make a real difference. And they're intended to help people with rheumatoid arthritis and osteoarthritis manage pain, distress, and daily function. So, one large meta analysis looked at 57 high quality studies, and they found these approaches had a moderate overall effect. In some cases, there were even stronger results. Mindfulness based programs, they're looking really promising, especially for reducing pain intensity, symptoms of depression. Although the results do vary from study to study, we don't have that real strong body of evidence. We are seeing the evidence become more and more convincing. We're also seeing a rise in digital CBT programs. So you might have actually seen them yourselves, but there are a lot more online and app based tools that are available right now. If you have any that you use personally on your day to day basis, I would encourage you to share those in the chat group because there are so many out there that are proving to help more and more people live with this disease. They have shown meaningful improvements in mood, anxiety, fatigue, and just overall well-being. We don't have the evidence that suggests it has a huge, um, crazy impact on physical pain itself, but they do seem to help people cope much better day to day. And importantly, none of these mind-body approaches have shown any evidence of harm. They're considered really safe, well tolerated, and very empowering, which is a big plus. Amongst all these strategies, though, I will say that cognitive behavior therapy really stands out. So, it's the most widely researched and most effective psychological approach for arthritis related pain. CBT, it's about helping people develop more balanced, realistic ways of thinking about their condition. So it's designed to help replace unhelpful thoughts and behaviors with ones that support coping and well-being. So the evidence has shown that CBT can reduce pain, it can improve mental health, and those benefits, very importantly, can last for up to a year. So, this is why CBT is actually recommended as one of the first lines of therapy for chronic pain linked to arthritis. You will see it ranked quite high in all the clinical guidelines for living with arthritis. Most of this research actually comes from randomized controlled trials as well. So, if you're not aware, your randomized controlled trials are your gold standard, very well designed studies. So we do need more larger studies, particularly looking at things like mindfulness. But to wrap this evidence base up here, CBT is the most effective psychological approach for arthritis pain. Mindfulness can absolutely help with mood, coping, and resilience, even if the results vary and we need more studies in this area specifically for arthritis. But digital tools are emerging as a really great way to support mental health and self management. Some examples of widely studied interventions and techniques do include mindfulness and breathing techniques, which are said to be some of the fastest ways to regulate your nervous system. So, a really powerful tool you can use, especially if you're having a day where your anxiety is heightened. Gentle movement like yoga or Tai Chi is very powerful for helping ease stiffness and improve your mobility, especially if you're experiencing a flare. Relaxation or guided imagery is very powerful for reducing muscle tension and lowering those stress hormones. Cognitive strategies like reframing unhelpful thoughts are known to help with reducing fear and that sense of helplessness that can organically come with a disease like arthritis that's so unpredictable. So these approaches, I want to say, they don't cure arthritis, but they're intended to help change the way your body experiences it. So one of the most fascinating things about the brain is that it's not fixed, it can actually help change and adapt through life. I'm wondering if anyone has ever heard of neuroplasticity, or you've come across the term, not quite sure what it means. It basically means that it's a brain's ability to rewire itself. It's about forming new pathways based on what we do, how we think, how we feel. And here's the thing though, neuroplasticity doesn't actually know the difference between helpful and unhelpful habits. So your brain, it rewires itself through stress, overstimulation, anxiety, just as easily as it does through meditation, sleep, movement, and moments of stillness. So, in other words, your brain is constantly reflecting your environment. That's why, with regular, consistent practice, mind body approaches like mindfulness, relaxation, cognitive strategies can be very helpful for retraining how your brain responds to pain. Over time, this can reduce the brain's reactivity to pain signals. It can help with lowering sensitivity, just supporting generally a calmer, more resilient nervous system. So, when we do talk about mindfulness or relaxation, some people they can imagine just sitting quietly, meditating, maybe grounding themselves in nature. Yes, it can look like that. For some people, it can also be about reading a book, watching your favorite TV show, catching up with friends, and having a coffee. It's what's meaningful to you. It's also about recognizing what is driving that stress response in the first place. So it's about learning to reframe how to think about it. And this is why I really like this flowchart and I bring it up from time and time again. It's to show you what mindfulness looks like in real time. It's a great reminder of how easily we can get caught in an automatic stress response without actually realizing it. So, learning to recognize and managing the stress response is such a fundamental part of improving your well being and how you experience a disease like arthritis. So mindfulness, it's about helping you spot that stress sooner by noticing those subtle changes in things like maybe it's your breathing that gets quicker when you're stressed. It could be that your muscles are tensing up and getting more tighter. It could be many, many body sensations or thought patterns. It could be you thinking worst case scenario when you've woken up and you're struggling to move. But it's once we catch this, we can pause and ask ourselves, what's driving this? Where's my attention right now? What thoughts or emotions are fueling this reaction? So, trying to catch those subtle changes early can make such a big difference to how you carry through this. So, by becoming aware of what's happening, we can gently bring our attention back to the present moment to help yourself break that stress loop. When we're not tuned in, the brain's fear center, it can really take over. So it can react automatically to perceived threats. It could easily jump into thinking worst case scenario for the day. That has a very strong ability to trigger your body's stress response system. Hormones like adrenaline and cortisol surge in the body. This can cause your body to tense up, could cause the mind to race, and it can make it hard to kind of get on top of it once you're in it. So when you're suddenly in fight or flight mode, even if that threat is just a thought, one of the easiest ways to spot stress early is through those changes in the breathing. So if you're someone who holds your breath when you're stressed, or you're someone who breathes really quickly, it becomes shallow, it becomes fast, often it's higher in the chest. If you can become more mindful of what your breath is doing, you can catch it early. You can pause and recognize that you're having a stress response. If you miss it, it's very cumulative. So stress can build. And in some cases, it can lead to panic attacks. Once we notice we're caught in a stress or anxiety, it's really just a chance to interrupt it. So you can start by checking in with your attention. What are you focusing on right now? Chances are your mind has jumped to the past. It's thought about how things have eventuated with a past flare. It could be thinking about the future. You have really important plans coming up and you're going to miss them because you can't move. Or self criticism. Why is my body like this right now when I've always been very fit and active in the gym and been very healthy throughout my whole life? So chances are your mind is running through all these thoughts. And when this happens, it should serve as a reminder to just gently bring your focus back to what's exactly in front of you right now. Using your breath, using those body sensations, using sound as anchors. It's very totally normal for this to happen. It's very normal for your mind to wander again, but that's what your mind does. So the key is to just simply notice when it's drifting and bringing it back again. And that's really the heart of meditation. It's the heart of mindfulness in real time. Noticing when your mind strays, returning to it without judgment. Over time, it's meant to help you stay more grounded, less reactive to stress. So, if it's one thing that mindfulness can teach us, is how to notice stress, recognize what's fueling it, return it to the present moment. And it is a skill, it takes practice, it takes self awareness. And this is why it can be such a powerful foundation for managing stress. So, like I said, there's been so much research in this area. Um, some people will say you need 20 minutes a day. Some people say 15 minutes in the morning, 15 minutes at night. Um, some will even go with 5 minutes. Research, what we know is that the dose of mindfulness and how much we actually need, there are comparable benefits amongst groups that have implemented 20 minutes a day versus groups who have implemented 5 minutes a day. Both groups have demonstrated significantly improved depression, anxiety, and stress compared with controls. So when it comes down to it and practicing it in your own life, there's no one size fits all. There's no one recommendation. The key is to find a balance in what works for you. Some people really thrive off 10 to 20 minutes a day. Some can thrive off 3 minutes a day. And the most important aspect is to just cultivate a practice that you can sustain and it can help you achieve your mindfulness goals is if that's what you intend to achieve. And so there is something called a growth mindset in psychology. There is this idea that our abilities, our coping skills, even our mindset itself can grow and it can change over time, especially when we learn from challenges. So this was coined by a psychology researcher called Carol Dweck. And it's really relevant when we're living with a condition like arthritis. Arthritis, it brings constant change, good days, bad days, flare ups, limitations. There are things we can't do anymore that we used to do. But there are so many opportunities to learn what actually works for you. A growth mindset is about, it's not about seeing setbacks as failure. It's instead reframing the thought around that, seeing it as feedback. It's about asking yourself, what can I learn from this rather than why did this happen to me? So, reframing how we think is not always about being positive. You can easily spiral that down that toxic positivity spiral, but it's more about finding those balanced, realistic ways of thinking that can really just help you move forward. So I've got examples listed here, and we can take a simple example like you might have a flare up after doing some gardening or walking further than usual. It can be super easy to slip into thinking, I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have tried it. I'll never get it right. And that's what we know as a fixed mindset, assuming that things can't change. A growth mindset response would sound more like, okay, that didn't go as planned. Maybe I need to break it up next time or do shorter bursts, or maybe I just need to give my body a rest or a break. Same exact situation, but with a completely different outcome in terms of how you feel and how you're moving forward. So your mindset, it doesn't have to be fixed, but it's not always being able to practice this kind of thing. It's a skill. It can be strengthened. It's just like a muscle. I always like comparing the brain to a muscle because we can do things to strengthen it, strengthen our mind. Every time you challenge an unhelpful thought and choose to reframe a situation, you're strengthening those mental muscles. And It can feel really awkward. It can feel very forced, but over time, it does take practice before it becomes more natural and instinctive. So, some ways to actually strengthen that mindset can include self awareness, self compassion, reflection, just asking yourself what happened, what helped me last time I faced something like this or faced something hard, and then connection. So, learning from others who have experienced similar situations. So, really strengthening your mindset, it's basically a muscle. So, just like physical exercise builds muscles, there are small mental habits that can build that resilience over time. It's the small daily mental shifts that have cumulative effects and they add up. So, some of the very simple ways you can start practicing this, just notice your self talk next time. So, try catching those unhelpful thoughts before they begin to spiral. Practicing gratitude or reflection, it's incredible to actually remind yourself of what's still meaningful or what's still going well. Connect with supportive people. That is absolutely the most powerful thing you can do. So, mindset grows stronger in community. Even with one another here, it's great to like meet each other and connect with each other and celebrate small wins. They do reinforce self efficacy and motivation. So, celebrate anything you think is a win in your day. First, again, it does take a lot of effort, but eventually it can become who you are. So progress is rarely dramatic, it's steady and it's cumulative. So there are so many techniques you can explore, and it can take some time before you find things that work for you. But you could even just start with chatting to your GP or your pain specialist, especially if you're someone who does get caught up in those negative thoughts or those um you get caught up in the anxiety and the stress of living with your condition. They absolutely know who to connect you with. They can also connect you with programs like CBT, mindfulness courses, or online tools that are designed for pain management. In addition, the ones I have listed here and I've linked you guys to, they're some of the online tools that are evidence based. So there's been a lot of science that have gone into building these modules. They're easily accessible, and the great thing is they're free. So after this webinar, you can easily jump online, sign up to the module, and it might be a 6 week course or an 8 week course that you have to complete, but it walks you through all the strategies, techniques, and practices. So, if you haven't heard of our Relax and Restore program, it's a 6 week online program. It's a practical, supportive way to put everything you've learnt today, everything we've spoken about, into practice. So, it's delivered through Zoom, and each session is about 45 minutes once a week. It's designed to easily fit into your routine, be accessible from the comfort of your home. So, whether you're absolutely new to these techniques or this science, or looking to build consistency in your mindfulness routine, it's this program that is intended to guide you through those steps. So it's about practicing that breath work, practicing relaxation. You also get to learn about how the biological effects of it and how it can help with something like arthritis. You can also learn more about some of the programs and services through Clara. If you haven't come across it yet, it's one of our new services that we offer. It's an app based tool powered by AI, but you can pretty much ask it questions if you want to learn more about mindfulness techniques or breath work practices. You can actually just punch it in and it should give you a range of information that relates back to that. So, just in summary, mindset is intended, it does influence how we experience arthritis. So, it's intended to give you more control over your disease. Positivity, it's not about thinking everything is bliss and grateful and you're going to come out of this, on top of the world. It's about realistic optimism, coping skills. Small daily habits are very powerful for shifting that perspective over time. And if it's anything I can get you to take away from today, is just pick one small mindset shift to focus on this week. You do it gradually and slowly. And over time, it's the practice that can really help you build those healthy coping mechanisms for when things get hard uh, and you're living with arthritis. So whilst we get to our Q&A, I'm just going to quickly check our chat box, and I'm going to see if any questions have come through.